So, alternating square twists. What does that mean? Well, we've got squares, which means that it's going to be a twist that has 4 pleats coming out of it that are all perpendicular to each other. Then the alternating part is that we have an A and a B. In this case, a left-handed and a right-handed of the same twist. And these A and B, all the A's are going to be right-handed, all the B's are going to be left-handed. And you can also have different sizes and different sides of the paper in these A and B twists. And then twists is a common term in origami tessellations, meaning that it's an arrangement of the paper that rotates as it collapses down. So let's take a look at some of our options here. If you saw the thumbnail for this video, then you'll know that there's some choices for A, some choices for B, and I'm going to go through those basic choices to show all of those examples, and then explain how you can add other choices as well. So let's dive in. Here I've got a right-handed closed square twist as my twist A, and a left-handed closed square twist as my twist B. I chose to keep them both on the same side of the paper, so this would be closed, closed, same. Next up, I've got closed, also closed, and you can tell it's a closed twist because it has this closed point on the back of the paper. And so this one would be closed, closed, opposite sides. So we've got closed, closed, same, closed, closed, opposite. Then you can do closed, open, same, closed, open, opposite. You can do open, open, same. And what we're going to fold together today is open, open, opposite, the one that I don't have in my examples. And I'm going to show y'all a few other options here real quick. So you don't have to use the same spacing for everything, or I should say those 3 choices of twist A, twist B, whether they're on the same side or not, doesn't fully constrain the tessellation. You also need to choose a spacing. So here I have these 2 grid spacings, which I commonly call a tube pleat. And that is in contrast with this tessellation, which has the exact same twists, spaced another grid spacing apart. So there's variation within this. And then if you've seen my video on hybrid square twists, you can also use these hybrid twists. And the cool thing about hybrid twists is they are halfway between closed and open squares. And so they have an orientation. So this tessellation, herringbone weave, has the A twist horizontal and the B twist vertical. There's another one, fence weave, that I don't have in front of me, where they're both in the same direction. You can also take these on opposite sides of the paper. And here I am having opposite directions, opposite sides. I could also have same direction, opposite sides, and get like yet another pattern. You can also combine a hybrid twist with one of the other twists. So closed or open. In this case, I have hybrid plus open. And here you'll notice that all of my hybrid twists are in the same orientation, whether I've squashed them in the same exact way or not. And this one was intended to be viewed just from this side. It's in a darker color, so I would be framing it so you can't see the backlighting, so you would just see the weave. So I don't care how my hybrid twist squashed down in that case. I'm just interested in, okay, I've got an open square and then these hybrids are all in the same orientation. So that's a little caveat on the advanced side, that the hybrid twists are importantly different in their orientation. So you can also go and do other things. As long as the pleats match up, you can pair anything square. So you can have this closed compound square with this open compound square. You could have open with another open, and this is kind of a special case because the compound lets you get around the right-left-handed alternation. These are actually all exactly the same square, but I can add in that alternation into the pattern as well. Then you can have things where you draw a bounding box around some square element and then mirror it on either side, top and bottom, left and right. And so this I would also consider to be in this alternation type of pattern that we see with the single square twists. And there's even more. You can change the spacing at different places in the pattern as well. So this would be an alternation similar to what we saw before, with closed squares on the front and on the back. This is Promenade, one of my patterns. And what I did here is I did a dent spacing around this loop of 4 twists, and then added an extra space on all 4 sides of it. And that extra space carries through along a tiling break, which I'll talk about a little bit more into the video. And we end up with alternating spacings in alternating tiling breaks. So we have dense, sparse, dense, sparse, dense, sparse in both directions. And so we can take this alternating pattern and give it a twist, or give it some extra space, some room to breathe, and make something completely different. And last but not least, we can also consider this alternation in terms of clusters of twists. So here I have 4 twists looped together, and you can see that within that loop of 4, I have exactly this pattern. So this loop of 4 is exactly the same as, say, this loop of 4, where I've got the closed, open on the back, closed, open on the back twists. And then I drew a bounding box around it, and I mirrored it all over to get the rest of the pattern. I can also do that with all closed twists. This is skew lines. Oh, that last one was ABBA clusters. I'll be talking about this one more on my Instagram page this week. And you can do that with those same closed open clusters with a denser spacing, and then you get meandering squares. So you can have these alternations that go anywhere from super simple to super complex. And what I'm going to be talking about in this video and the next 5 weeks is different structures to apply this alternation to. So I'm grabbing my grid. I've got a 24-fold square grid. And if you're wondering how to do the odd division, I did a video recently on the math needed for origami tessellations. Got the technique for that in there. And as I said earlier, we're going to do open front and open back. Now the open square twist is not centered on a grid intersection. My grid is centered on a grid intersection, but the open square is not. And so I could try and place my open squares so that they're around a block that is centered on a grid intersection, or I could just accept that this is a practice piece and I will not be having everything centered. I will not have a position of rotational symmetry in the center of my paper. And I'm going to go with that last option because it's much easier and a lot easier to follow as well. So what I'm going to do is fold my grid in half and in half again. So 2 directions in half. This will help me find my center point. And now that I've located my center point, I'm going to pick one of those 4 grid squares right next to it to be the center of my first twist. So I'm going to arbitrarily choose this one, and I'm going to make it a right-handed twist. So that means that my pleats are coming around, cycling the way that my right-handed fingers curl with my thumb up in the air. Again, this will be an open square twist, and we know that it's open even from this stage because whatever we're outlining with these extensions of the mountain folds is the hole that will show up on the back. Our valley folds will be out around our twist. And now that we've got things set up, I can go ahead and start to fold. So I'm going to bring up each grid line that's marked as mountain. My valleys are going to come exactly and no further than the next mountain then they hit. And with this structure in place, you can start to see the twisting motion. I will lay my mountains down onto my valleys. I need to get all 4 of those laid down firmly before I push just outside of where my valleys hit the next mountain and then flatten from the top. I'm going to use my bone folder to smooth everything out and get a nice finish on my piece, or on my twist rather. So now that I've got my first twist in place, I'm going to flip over to the back side to put in my next twist. And I'm not going to pay particular attention to which side was shorter or longer based on my center point that got kind of uncentered relative to the pattern. So when I flip over, I'm just taking any of the pleats arbitrarily as my next pleat. And since we're doing an alternation, this is going to just be whatever, like we're going to treat all 4 of these pleats the same. So it doesn't matter to me which one specifically I'm working on. When we get to the very edge, we'll notice some differences on the sides in what partial twists are present. But for right now, I'm going to pick a pleat and I'm going to arbitrarily choose to have an extra spacing in addition to the tube pleat, just to emphasize that yes, there really are tessellations where there's no good positions of symmetry that land on grid intersections, and also to make it easier to fold. So if that's where my next pleat is going to be, to get my one wider than tube spacing, I need to figure out where my target square is for this next open square twist. And that would be this square right here. because you can see when I pull this up, I've got these two valleys. They need to be outside of the mountains relative to the center. And this is the only square that matches that description. And in general, the square will be just outside of the new mountain fold on top of the old pleat. So bringing my new pleat in place, I'm going to need to offset the mountain one spacing to come up and offset the mountain one spacing vertically to continue to the right. Then I can squash this twist and to encourage good habits from the beginning, I'm going to then flip my paper over and I'm going to hold on to this pleat on the bottom here as I flip, and I'll flip that to my right hand side so that I can put a new twist on this side on that same pleat that I grabbed when I flipped. I'm keeping track of that 3 spacings between valleys, and I'll need a mountain beside. And now the question is, which of these 2 pleats am I putting my next twist on? And it's the one that's coming from the other side. So this is my target square. That should be a solid mountain line there. And what I'm going to do is, instead of folding a pleat overlap through here, I'm actually going to reverse the pleat ordering. So my new pleat goes through first, and then my old pleat closes on top. And this is a general technique that we're going to be using throughout. And anytime that you are in the square tiling and you have twists on opposite sides alternating like this, you're going to want to start with the shortest pleat of a set of parallel pleats. Notice that this one is 1 grid spacing longer than what we see of this one. And this will become more obvious as you have more repeats. And then when you put in your twist, you're going to want to reverse the pleat ordering of the next pleat over, and then bring up your twist. So we've got our 3rd twist in now, and I'm going to come back to this pleat overlap, but it's an intersection from 2 twists on this side, so it needs to be on the opposite side. I'll make sure I'm holding that pleat intersection, pleat overlap rather, when I flip, and then my target square is going to be sitting right on top. So then I open the overlap so I can put in my next open square twist and squash the paper. And by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I do have the chat up and visible to me, so I'll try and answer those as they come in. Okay, so I started with this twist, then did this one, that one, and finally our last one so far. Next up, I'm going to continue going around, and I've got a new set of parallel pleats that I'm interested in. This one is shorter, so I will grab it, flip it so it's on my right hand side, and this should look familiar. We've got that same valley, same mountain, same target square. And if it doesn't look familiar, go back in the recording and see exactly that this is the same. And once again, we're going to reverse the pleat ordering on the pleat above. Then set up our new open square twist and squash. Then I'll flip over to the back side once again, and I've got my target grid square right on top of my grid, my pleat overlap, which I will open up. And fold over and squash, just like I did the one before. And we're going to continue this pattern of flipping over between each twist. Now I've got 3 pleats that are parallel. This one is still the shortest. And so I'll grab it, flip it over to my right-hand side, and I'll mark this one still, but from here out, I won't be marking them. And find my target grid square the same way that I found the last 2. And once again, I'm going to reverse the pleat ordering. And this time, it's important to notice I'm just reversing the first pleat overlap. So this one stays the same order as it would be if I wasn't reversing anything. And I might need to pull up my whole square twist before that reversed pleat overlap will really lay down flat. So squashing my twist, I'm going to follow my overlap to the back side, where I will find my target square. And as I open this up, I notice that I still have a pleat overlap here. And I'm going to reverse the order on this pleat overlap as well. This makes it a friendlier overlap to open on the other side. So you could do it without reversing the pleat ordering, but I find that it's much, much easier to keep all the twists in the paper when you're putting in the new one if you've reversed the order. Then flipping back again, I've got another target square on top of that pleat overlap that I can resolve into an open square twist. Before I start the process all over again. So here I've completed another tiling break, which is to say that I don't have any pleat overlaps left. And I tend to define tiling breaks as rings around the center. So I had a central twist, and then I just completed one ring of twists around the central twist. And we hit multiple like intermediate stage tiling breaks in between, where we completed 2 twists, and then we would have a tiling break, and then we did 2 more and had a tiling break, did 2 more and had a tiling break, or rather, yeah, we did the first one, and then the second one, we had a tiling break, then 2, then 2, then 3. And so these are all places in the tiling of the square tiling where you have a rectangular bounding box. So these are natural stopping points for tessellations. And once we're here, we're going to continue in the same way. We're going to pick a set of parallel pleats, and I'm noticing my valley is not actually on the grid line there. That's better. Going to pick a set of parallel pleats, pick the shortest one, figure out what side we need to be on to start. And this short pleat is coming from a twist on this side, so we need to flip to the opposite side. I've got a hold of that same pleat. And we're going to go ahead and do the same technique. Again, I'm going to reverse the first and only the first pleat overlap. And zoom back in so we can see more details. And make sure that I've got my open square in place. This is the point where you might see some differences in your paper and mine if we happen to be oriented differently with respect to the center, but that doesn't change the technique. Then we have this pleat overlap that needs a twist on the opposite side. I can set up for that twist, and I notice I'm causing a pleat overlap. I need to reverse that order. So my new pleat goes through first, and notice that I'm very certain about what grid line that new pleat is on before I reverse the overlap. We don't want to be causing extra work or guessing on this. And then flipping back over, I have that pleat overlap that I'm going to open up into an open square twist. So on any of these alternating options on opposite sides, so closed, 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 open, or open, open, I'm going to be using the same technique of finding the shortest pleat, flipping to the side where that pleat is the one that's getting a new twist, reversing the pleat overlap that's closest to that twist. And in this case, I have just a partial twist. And I know the angle here because I know it goes over 1 up 2. So I can match that angle over here. And then I'm going to follow my pleat overlap. So we cause pleat overlaps, then we resolve them with twists. And I'm going to get a new twist in here, again, reversing that first pleat overlap. And squashing. And here it might be helpful to go in from the back side with the bone folder, making sure that the corner is nice and pointy and exactly where it should be. Then we continue on around, and I'm doing exactly the same thing over and over and over. And with these alternating tessellations that are alternating on opposite sides, it's very easy to remember which twist to put in, even if you have closed and open, because all of the closed twists will be on one side and all of the opens will be on the other. Like this one has all closed on one side and all open on the other. So I'm going to continue around doing exactly the same thing. Just going to speed it up a bit to my normal folding speed, so you can see what this can look like once you've mastered the technique. So I'm reversing this pleat overlap. And yes, this is a little bit harder to visualize as you reach the edge of the paper. And then flipping over, I've got another one. And again, if you have any comments, I do have eyes on the chat. On this side of the paper, my twists have an extra grid spacing that I didn't have on this side, and that's because I started off center, because there wasn't a good place to start with a grid intersection as the center. And that is perfectly fine. I'm just using that alternating pattern to remember what to do next. And so you'll notice that I haven't gotten out a crease pattern this whole time. And that is pretty intentional. I might use a crease pattern to store these alternating patterns, or to plan a project. Like if I had a particular pattern that I wanted to do really nice with a border to take advantage of the tiling break, then I wouldn't want to do it in a grid that's aligned to the edge of the paper, because then I would be leaving large amounts of paper unfolded so that I wouldn't have any partial twists and would have a border all the way around. So a crease pattern is very helpful for those kinds of planning decisions that are harder to do with a folded form or an idea like open, open, opposite sides, 3 spacings, which is how I'm remembering this one. And one of the great things about these alternations is they do have short descriptions like that, like open, open, opposite sides, 3 spacings. Cool. That describes this whole tessellation. And because I know how I want to do my, how I want to work around, like start on the shortest pleat on the side that it needs a new twist, and reorder the pleat overlap with the first intersection, the first overlap, then all I need is that short description, and I'm able to fold the entire tessellation. So I've gotten all the way around that next ring around the center. And I've got some bits in the corners that could still use some more twists. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in. I'm going to start with this corner because it just has the 1 pleat and it's convenient. It actually has 2 but that's just a single spacing. And yeah, I'm gonna want to do that side first because there's no easy way to squash that from the opposite side. So I do actually have 2 pleats in this direction. It just didn't look like it because I wasn't paying attention to the other side. Whoops. But we can figure that out pretty quickly when we go to put in our next twist. So I've got that same situation in this corner, and I can see, okay, I've got these 2 pleats. I'm going to want the short one first. I'm going to bring that in and reorder this pleat overlap. Get that partial twist in place, and partial twists are completely voluntary for beginner folders. I tend to do them mostly because I get a little bit pedantic about actually following the tessellation repeats. And then we can get this whole twist in right here on the corner before moving on to the next edge. And I can see here I've got 1, 2, looks like maybe 3 pleats, but my valley fold would be right on this edge for this pleat, and so I don't need to worry about it. So I'll grab that second pleat, flip over, set up my twist with the reversed pleat overlap, and notice how I was reaching inside to get my partial twist to squash nicely. And I've got some questions here about what paper I'm using. I use almost exclusively Skytone, which was originally made for printing certificates. And so it would definitely be worth it if you can't find Skytone in your area to look for other certificate papers. And now Skytone comes in 4 different weights. So I use the lightest weight, and it's still like perfectly heavy for this kind of tessellation work. And I haven't heard of pergamon paper. If there's another description of that paper, I'd be interested in hearing it. But no matter what paper I'm using, I'm going to use the same techniques. So this technique of reversing the pleat overlap before you put in the next twist is so that even if you have a thinner paper that is more prone to tear, you have a good chance of making it through in your folding without problems. All right, so there's our finished open, open, opposite sides, 3 spacings tessellation. And I can see from this that it would be really cool to space this closer together, to have 2 spacings. And if I did that, I would be able to have a grid intersection in the center. So sometimes it's worth playing around and just going ahead and folding some of these things to figure out how you would want to fold the next one. And I'm holding this up to my light here, and there's some interesting backlighting. It looks like each twist is separated from the others in space, and there's an interesting effect in these open spaces where we see kind of this star forming where it's only a single layer of paper. So that's interesting. And if we had condensed the spacing, I don't think we would have any extra space in the middle there. Or maybe just slightly. Yeah, because if we condensed, if this was up here, then we would have very little open space in the middle. So depending on what you're going for and what paper you're using, you might be going for a backlighting effect where you want more variation in the backlighting, or you could be going for a denser effect where you want the twists to be closer together. So that's what we're working with. And in these alternating tessellations, we have a lot of different options. And one of the things that I talk about in advanced twist techniques is that we're not limited to just closed and open square twists either. We've got the hybrid square, and we actually have a lot of different hybrid squares, and there's a whole spectrum of twists where you can have closed, open, double open, triple open, quadruple open. You can just make the twist more and more open by outlining a bigger space in between your mountain fold extensions. So that's all kind of trippy, and it adds and compounds the options that you have for these alternating tessellations. Then with the spacing, you can do things like, instead of having these open squares be one space, have their corners one space out from the closed hole, you can have it be right next to it, and that's how you get a flagstone in this tiling. So flagstones of squares are closed square on one side alternating with some amount of open square on the other side in the densest possible spacing. And so you didn't think you'd be learning how to do a flagstone today, but here we go. And the denser the spacing, the more important it is to reverse that first pleat overlap when you're switching sides. So there's so many applications to this alternation, and I hope that you now have an idea of how you can go about finding your own alternations and going ahead and being confident folding them, even if you don't have a crease pattern, even if you don't have video instructions. So happy folding, everyone, and I will see you next week with alternation in equilateral triangles. See you there.